Hi everyone, welcome to our Facebook Live today. We are broadcasting live from Highlands Ranch, Colorado at Children's Hospital Colorado at our South Campus location. And today we have Dr. Julie Wilson from our Sports Medicine Center and co-director of the Concussion Program, answering all questions concussion related. So thank you for being here, Dr. Wilson, and we're excited to hear what you got about concussions.
Thanks, Melissa. It's great to be here today.
Great. So I'll just kick things off. We've been seeing a lot of just stories in the media and the news concussion related, and so I'm curious, is there a way to help prevent concussions with young athletes?
It's a great question, Melissa. So we wish we could prevent all concussions, but that may not be possible. A lot of interest has been in trying to change the rules of games. So we've seen changes in football, for example, changing kickoff locations and changing other rules, penalizing targeting of the helmet or defenseless players. So we know that we can decrease concussion rates with some of those changes, but it's been pretty hard to completely eliminate all concussions. There certainly is also interest in things like improving neck strength, and trying to improve what we call sportsmanship or fair play. So by penalizing teams basically who get more penalties and rewarding teams who have better sportsmanship and less dirty play, if you will. Incentivizing good play and fair play may help with concussion rates, but again, it's going to be pretty hard to eliminate all concussions.
Okay. All right. You mentioned helmets, and so spanning off of that, is there protective gear, other protective gear that athletes can wear to prevent concussions?
Yeah, it's another great question. And the challenging thing is that a concussion is an injury to the brain. And so there's a lot of interest in things that we could maybe put on the head to help protect the brain. But anything that goes outside of the skull, helmets, headgear, or any other device is going to be limited because it's not in direct contact with the brain. So it's important to have a well-fitting helmet or headgear in good shape, whatever's required for your sport. But even having the most expensive helmet out there doesn't seem to protect against a concussion necessarily.
What about, I've been seeing those sensors in the helmets. Do those help detect concussions, or just the technology out there?
It's a really fascinating technology, and there's been a lot of research done in that area. The challenging thing is, one, again, the sensor really is only measuring impact to the head and not impact to the brain, because it's usually either on the helmet itself or potentially on a patch on the skin. So it's not measuring direct force to the brain. The other thing is, in order for these to be very helpful, we'd want them to correlate or match the impact force with whether there was a concussion or not, or whether the severity of the injury. And the challenging thing is we see athletes who get concussions at lower impact forces, and then we see athletes who have a higher impact force and don't get a concussion. So there's not a direct correspondence between the impact force and resulting in a concussion, and that makes it a little tricky to understand how these sensors should be used or if they should be used at all.
Mm-hmm. And how long, so say an athlete has a concussion, what is the average, recovery time? Is there an average recovery time?
So it seems like the recovery time in children and adolescents may be a little bit longer than that of adults, but it's still fairly rapid overall. Most young people are going to recover and return to their usual activities, including sports, within about 4 weeks at most from their injury.
And age-wise, so we think a lot of young athletes being in high school sports, but what about on the flip side, like younger than that? Do you see younger middle school age kids suffering from concussions?
I do. I see plenty of kids in elementary school or in middle school. Many of their injuries are sports related, but some of them are also related to normal childhood activities like playing on the playground or falling off a bicycle or even going skiing or snowboarding. So we know that concussions happen in sports, but they can also happen in many other of our activities. So the recovery time in those kids seems to be about the same within about that 4-week period. But we definitely need more data to understand sport-related concussions in that age group as well as recreation.
And what if, what symptoms, signs or symptoms should a parent look for at home, whether it was a high school student or a kiddo that bonked their head?
Absolutely.
What to look for?
So you mentioned an important thing is that there has to be an injury in order for there to have a concussion. So there should be some sort of impact to the head, maybe the face, the neck, or maybe even the body. So think about a lacrosse player or a hockey player that gets checked, that might cause a concussion. So there has to be an injury. And then the symptoms from a concussion typically develop fairly rapidly in onset after the injury. So that's usually immediately within a few seconds or minutes. Sometimes it can take a few hours for symptoms to develop, but if symptoms develop more than a day later, then it's important to evaluate if there might be another cause for those symptoms. Many of the common symptoms that we see are headache, feeling tired, feeling nauseous or dizzy, feeling confused or slowed down. Kids sometimes are slower to answer questions or seem like they're having trouble thinking or remembering things.
Okay. What about rest? How important is that? How much should an athlete get before going back to school? They've got their concussion, they have their plan, and how much rest should they have?
Right, so we used to think that a lot of rest was helpful, but we're finding out more and more that the period of rest that's needed after concussion seems to be likely very short. So most current experts in concussion management and the guidelines that have come out for concussion management are recommending a brief period of rest, potentially a couple of days, and then a gradual return to usual activities, including school and homework. We don't recommend return to sports or other activities that are high risk for a repeat head injury until the child is fully recovered. But it seems that it's safe to get back into school and let them start doing their usual daily activities as soon as their symptoms are improving and they're feeling a little bit better.
Okay. And speaking of symptoms, now how do they affect one's mood or emotions?
It's a pretty complicated question, but I think the impact on mood and emotion probably comes from a couple different places. So one, when you have a concussion, again, there are a lot of symptoms and you don't feel very good. If you have a headache for a week, if you're feeling dizzy and nauseous and tired, if you have to miss school and you get behind on school, just the symptoms themselves of how you feel can really affect your mood. Just think of the last time you had a bad cold or the stomach flu. You probably were a little bit cranky and irritable too. So the symptoms themselves can drive some of that emotional response to concussion. It's also not unusual that the concussion itself seems to have some symptoms. So we see kids that right after a concussion on the sideline of a game will get really emotional. They'll start crying or get upset or get really angry, and it's not their usual personality. So some of the brain changes that come along with concussion may be responsible for that as well. And then the other part of it is that it's a pretty stressful situation. There are a lot of kids who are very healthy, very active. They're going to school, they're playing sports, they're playing on the playground, they're doing their usual activities, and then they get a concussion and they don't feel good, and it pulls them out of their usual activities. They can't go to school for a couple of days. They might get behind on their schoolwork. Maybe they miss a few tests. They have a lot going on that they need to make up, and it just gets very stressful because they have a lot going on and they don't have their usual coping strategy, which is getting out, playing, having fun, playing sports. And so that can be a very stressful situation, and I think that's another layer that's really important to consider and support when kids are recovering from concussion.
And is there a way to minimize those emotional effects? Or how can one support?
Yeah, so I think there are a few different ways to accomplish that. So one is understanding, again, the different ways that the emotional effects might result from the concussion. So helping them manage their symptoms is really important. Having them see their primary care provider or a concussion specialist to have a good treatment plan in place to manage headaches and other physical symptoms is really important. Also, being patient with your child, giving them extra time to get ready in the morning, extra time to get their schoolwork done, allowing them breaks and just a little rest period if they get overwhelmed or frustrated, and acknowledging that that's probably a pretty normal part of recovery and really important to give themselves extra time and be patient with themselves while they're recovering. The other thing is, if you're noticing your child is having a pretty intense or excessive emotional response, then it's probably a good idea to get them in with a healthcare provider so we can try to understand if this is still related to concussion or if there may be another layer, something else going on that they need more help with.
Right. What about those, especially in around competitive sports or in high school sports as well, but you just really want to get back out there, get back in the game, whether it's right after the concussion or during the game or, a few weeks later, what should one help to tell or say to, tell their kid or athlete that you're not quite ready yet?
There are a couple important points about return to play. The first thing that I like to emphasize with my athletes is actually about recognition and removal from play. So if you have an athlete who gets hit and they feel any symptoms of concussion, headache, dizziness, their vision goes blurry, they feel unsteady, anything feels off after a head impact or another significant body impact, they need to get out of practice or the game right away. And the reason is that we actually have some emerging research that shows that athletes who continue to participate in sports and other strenuous physical activity after their concussion, immediately after their concussion, those athletes are taking longer to recover than kids who get out right away. So if they remove themselves from play or they recognize it, someone recognizes it, coach, parent, athletic trainer, and removes them from play, we can start the healing right then on the sideline and start the recovery time. So I think that's really important to emphasize because we want kids to do the right thing and get out of the game. There's no game that's more important than your health, especially the health of your brain. Okay? The second thing is it's really important not to go back to activity until you're fully recovered. If you sprain your ankle and you try to go back before it's recovered sufficiently, you're going to sprain it again and probably make it worse. A similar thing can happen with your brain. If you get another hit while you're still recovering from a concussion, you're almost certainly going to feel worse and make your recovery take longer. And in incredibly rare cases, a more significant, very serious brain injury could occur. But for most kids, it's just the implication that they could make their recovery take longer and then miss even more time.
How, specific to Children's Hospital Colorado, how do we treat concussions?
So we take kind of a multi-dimensional approach where, again, we look at helping the athletes with and all our patients with their physical symptoms, making a plan to treat headaches and other symptoms like that. If they've got a neck injury, a lot of times we'll do neck exercises because that can impact their recovery and headaches as well. We give them a really good school plan to make sure they've got support in school, more time, help making up missed assignments and other things like that, making sure they can stay on track and don't get overwhelmed with school demands. Then the other thing that we work at is making sure that they've got enough support around them, support from their parents and their coaches and their teammates and their peers, so they understand what's going on and they can really help get back into their usual life and then hopefully return to sport when they're fully recovered.
Okay, great. And I know we're running short on time, but I have to ask just because it's football season. Is football dangerous as it relates to concussions?
Well, that's a great question, Melissa, because I think it depends on what you call dangerous. In my field, I see a ton of kids with injuries, and I can tell you that I've seen kids get hurt in virtually every sport and activity and every daily activity. I've had kids fall down stairs and get concussions, and I've had kids get hit in the head with baseballs, and I've had kids fall on the ice and get concussions. So I think you have to acknowledge that there's a higher rate of injury in collision sports, including football, but also ice hockey and lacrosse. But there's really no sport or activity that is 100% safe. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that there are plenty of kids who are out there playing football and other sports who end up being very healthy and never get a concussion. And there are tremendous benefits to being physically active throughout your life and many benefits to being an athlete and being in sports.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wilson, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. If there's any more questions or where's a good place for people to go for more resources and information?
Feel free to visit our website, www.children'scolorado.org/concussions, and you'll find plenty of additional information there.
Great, and please feel free to ask more questions if you'd like right here on our Facebook Live.